Hi everyone, welcome back to the VSO Gun Channel, and today we're talking about lasers and everything that you need to know about them to be proficient with them. So let's cut to the chase. Number 1, never use a laser unless you're under night vision. Well, that just about sums it up, guys. I think that that's all we need to say about the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you guys on the next one. I'm kidding. There's a variety of reasons why you might want to use a laser on your firearm. Most prolific among those, however, is use with night vision because it's a little bit more difficult to use traditional sights or optics under nods than it is to use a laser that projects a beam. And I know that there's going to be somebody that's going to chime in below that doesn't own night vision and doesn't use it. It's going to tell me I'm wrong. I can't wait to see that. But I digress. Today we're going to cover some of those reasons in our journey to understand this technology, which in my opinion is constantly misapplied. And because of that, it turns out that the technology is actually a little bit harder to use than a lot of people give it credit for at face value. But to be able to do that, we first have to understand sights, how they work, and how firearms work with those sights. Guys, I know that you know what sights are. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, but I don't think that you've ever heard sights talked about like this before. So here we go. Sights all do this exact same thing, whether they are red dot sights like this guy right here or aperture sights like those ones right there. They define a hitbox that then we can operate inside of. And how they do that is the rear sight defines the window that we're talking about, and then the front sight pinpoints the point of focus. Red dot sights do the exact same thing. Rear sight is the housing of the optic, so that defines the window that we're talking about, and then the dot that is projected from the emitter onto the screen then defines our point of interest. That hitbox then is placed on the firearm in such an orientation that it elevates the barrel ever so slightly, causing the bullet to be fired into the air. It will rise up against gravity, eventually run out of gas and come back down to earth. That's why a lot of times you end up with 2 zeros, or you see zeros expressed in 2 different yardages. You have a short yardage, which is on its way up, and then we have a long yardage, which is on its way down. All those things also apply to lasers. But there's a couple additional complications that we have to add into the system to fully understand the technology and how to apply it. But before we do, guys, I gotta pay the bills. So today's video is sponsored by Sonoran Desert Institute. Have you ever thought about pursuing a career in the firearms industry, or perhaps wanted to learn more about a particular discipline as it relates to guns? Perhaps you're under intense pressure from your family to go to college, but you realize that's a really bad investment because the only things that you're good at are guns and basket weaving. If any of that is you, then perhaps an educational foundation might be something you want to look into. Sonoran Desert Institute is a DEAC accredited online college focusing on programs and courses pertinent to firearms. So if you're into gun repair, ballistics, or learning about firearms, SDI might be something you want to look into. They even have funding plans and payment options available for anybody who doesn't have a pile of money laying around, like most of us. So if you're interested, you can catch up with them at sdi.edu. Special thanks to SDI for making today's video possible. Now there are 2 lasers that we're going to be using for today's video. The first one is this Viridian X5L, and this is a green visible laser. And the second one is this guy right here. This is a PERS 3 laser illuminator module. It is a visible and IR laser, so a dual spectrum laser and an IR illuminator. And I have a full video out on this thing, just kind of an expose on kind of how it is and how it works. I'll have that linked in the description box down below if you guys want to see that. First and foremost, back to the ballistic arc. Again, the bullet is fired up into the air, it apexes, and then it comes back down to earth. We have a really straight line coming out of the emitter. We cannot possibly get that line to match at all points the parabolic ballistic arc. One of the things is really straight, and one of the thing is really curved. Well, you're like, well, Kurt, we do it with sights. Why can't? No. We match a single point on the curve, and it gives us 2. The problem with emitting a beam is that it keeps on going into space, and whatever juxtaposition or cattywampusization that it has relative to the bore axis will continue to propagate off into space. So let's start with the simplest case, which is an underbarrel mounted laser. We are trying to hit a point along that arc from under the arc, which in my opinion is wrong, but there isn't a lot of space on a lot of pistols. Usually most pistols are only going to give you an underbarrel rail. There's no other place to put it. So when we think about that, the only way to get inside that ballistic arc is to take an extreme angle of that laser up like this. And that is not drawn to scale, I understand that. But that emitter has to point a laser up at an angle to be able to get to where that bullet is going to rise to. And because of that, after it crosses the arc, it will never be right again. Now, moving on a little bit to get a little bit more complicated, and this is one of the reasons why this laser module is great for today's demonstration. A lot of people, when they think about a laser mounted underneath of the bore, they think of it as the emitter being in the geometric center of their gun. And that is almost never the case. There's almost always some kind of offset from that emitter to where the bullet is actually going to fly, or the line of flight of the bullet as far as its lateral spatial orientation. Whether that's generated by the fact that it's not clipped directly to the barrel and that the rail itself is cattywampus to the rest of the gun, or whether the frame is bent, or whether the wind is blowing really hard that day. It is a statistical improbability that that emitter is going to be lined up with the bullet. Well, the reason this one's great is it doesn't even try, because it's stacked with an illumination module next to it, and because of that, it's got a lateral offset already. So when you add that whole, hey, we got to fire this laser up like this to be able to get to where the bullet's going to be, and because of that, we're only going to be able to cross at one point. Not only do you have to do that vertically, you have to do that horizontally as well. As in, not only does the laser have to go up like this, but it's got to go inboard like that. And because of that, all lasers are going to have some kind of lateral shift when you project it. It'll be right at that one point, that 1 yardage, where it coalesces with the bullet. Aptly demonstrated by this guy right here. You can see this laser emitter right here is all the way over here. And the reason that is because we wanted to be able to clear that iron sight. So the easiest way for me to show this to you guys is going to give you a look through the SRS that was mounted on top of the rifle that I was holding. As we change the terrain that the laser is emitted on, you can see that the resolution between the emitted dot by the laser module on the purse and that is projected onto the SRS screen grows. As it gets farther away, it gets closer, and then it eventually, at a longer distance, if I could see that far, they would resolve again. So a lot of people that wouldn't understand this thing, especially those people that think that you can do this with Soviet side-mounted optics too, that have, of course, never tried to do it before, would say, Kurt, well, why don't you just do some measurements and then just always have it pointed different than the point of impact? Why don't you just point it 2 inches off board or whatever from your zero? Okay, sure. Let's try it and see what happens. So what I have here is I took the gun and I mounted it in the vise. And then I took some measurements of where that emitter is relative to the bore of the firearm. I transferred those measurements onto a piece of cardboard, and then I rammed a rod through the center of it and down the barrel. I offset the card a couple feet, and then I moved the zero of that laser to that point. That laser now emits a perfectly straight line extending out from the emitter's position relative to the bore of the gun. I got really lucky with the Viridian because it was mechanically zeroed from the factory, but I had to do some movement on the purse because it did the exact same thing with this gun too. So I waited for it to get a little bit later in the day because I was really concerned about you guys being able to see this. It was a pretty bright day out today, and now the sun is setting, and I think that we're going to be able to see what we're talking about here. So I'm shooting at this target. Second from the right. Yeah, sorry guys, it doesn't work that way. Now it's adjusted back to where it should be. Now to understand this, we're going to do some trigonometry. And I promise, very few numbers. Only the ones that are required. I don't want to lose any of you guys. But for this, we're going to imagine this optic here has no vertical component. We'll get back to vertical here in a second. But we're going to just talk about the horizontal component. So, looking at this thing has approximately a 1-inch offset from the center of the bore. So let's say, for instance, that I zero this gun at 25 yards, because I don't see very well. That means that the emitter is going to create an angle to push that beam inboard and cross the target at exactly 25 yards. So if I then moved off that 25-yard target and went to a 50-yard target, that emitter would continue to push that laser out to that distance at the same angle, and therefore we would be exactly the offset of that emitter at that distance, but the wrong direction, projecting the beam to the left as it passes the point of zero. If we use the projected dot, then we would miss to the right by 1 inch. If we use those same settings and blow it out to 100 yards, now we're talking about 3 inches of offset. So that's enough for our imaginary system. You can see relatively predictable on how that's going to behave as far as a lateral orientation. Now let's make it more complicated. Back to our vertical. So this guy is mounted under the barrel, and it's not just the vertical offset from under the muzzle. Remember that bullet is going to move in a parabolic arc. We're going to zero, or what I have seen people do, is they're going to zero that laser at 7 yards. Whatever that offset is vertically, plus whatever the difference of the ballistic arc is. So there's a compounding of problems. And what that ends up being is that when you take a laser that's zeroed at 7 yards or something like that, you try to shoot it at 50 and you end up missing 10 feet low. You end up shooting the range top. How we fix that for the rifle type stuff is, you'll notice this thing is mounted above the bore. When you mount the laser module above the bore, on its way to its offset of the laser, it's going to be on this side of the laser. And then after it passes it on its way to its apex, it's going to be on this side of the laser. But that is not as much different as it is down here. The only way that that laser can be pointed in a relatively straight line and touch that bullet is if you're using the far zero. So after it's already met its apex and is coming back down. And to be honest, I just simply can't see that far. Okay, I told myself I wasn't going to do this and I wasn't going to go there, but I'm going to go there. Let's talk about you heathens that think that mounting the laser on the side is good. Unless you're talking Soviet stuff, and like, for instance, this is a Zenko Soviet laser, and their mounts, if you look at them, will put this emitter, when mounted on this side of the gun, will put that emitter pretty much right in line, just a little bit above the line of the bore, putting it on an AR. There is a right way and a wrong way to put that laser on the side. And that depends on what side the emitter's on. If the emitter's on the right, then that laser has to be on this side of the gun. Because we want that laser emitter to be above the bore, it has to go on this side of the gun. If we put it on this side of the gun, that puts the emitter under the bore. And that takes us back to the same issues that we have with this. 50 yards. And we're shooting at 25 to start with. We're just going to see what happens. So a little bit off center, not a whole lot off center, but basically where we were shooting. We were shooting 300 blackout tonight. These big honking Fiocchi 220 grain hollow points leave a nice splash on our target tonight. I'm going to call that in the center. Let's go take a look. So you can see roughly the same spot. I'm going to call that center. You guys can argue in the comments whether it is or not. Now, of course, that could have been a point of aim thing, but you can see that it moved.
That's what we're talking about. Although, apparently, my hold wasn't all that great. We do have the drop that I was looking for. It wasn't a super stable hold, but I feel like my hold might have been a little bit high at that distance, but it was definitely left. I mean, I think we can all agree by watching the video that that shot broke a little bit to the left, but it is now hitting low, which is what we would expect.
So what do you guys think? You had enough of the lasers yet? I know that I have. What it really boils down to is that that laser is going to go out and be exactly correct at exactly one point. And then everything else is going to be some shade of wrong. Now, how wrong it is depends on how you set up your laser and what the system that you're setting it up on allows you to do. Those pistols, they're going to have inherent error to them because you're going to be mounting the thing underneath the barrel. The rifles, you got a little bit more latitude. That's up to you guys to minimize that error and then understand those margins and how to manage it. I've given you guys the primer on how to do that, but the thing I gotta say is that information is going to be silenced and marginalized. We are getting shadow banned. It just is the state of things today. And to keep that from happening, or to help combat that, it does absolutely help if you guys do all the things that all the YouTubers tell you to do, you know, touch all the buttons down below in all the wrong ways. I don't even know. But also, in addition to that, you can consider supporting the channel on Patreon and Subscribestar, and you'll see some of those names on screen now.